1995 was a really strange year because when you put a young driver along the established Carlos Sainz, previous world champion, you expected Colin to sort of fit in behind him and Carlos to lead the way. But, well, as we all know, 1995 didn't quite turn out like that. In any racing team, there's always a competitive edge between two drivers. They've got the same equipment, the same team behind them, so they are really compared on an equal level. And it was a bit like that in Subaru with Carlos and Colin. You'd always see that little edge, and Carlos perhaps had the advantage of his experience and on tarmac, whereas Colin had the bravery and youth on his side, and he was incredible in the forests, of course. So it was there was always a tension in the team, but actually, if you manage that tension properly, that's how you get the best out of teams. When I look back at the early part of that season, and when you consider after Portugal, Carlos had such a strong position, there would be a tendency I would say, to sort of start to put your effort towards Carlos in the knowledge that he was the one that was going to be your the one that's going to lead the way for the rest of the year. So I guess in some ways that was happening, but at the same time, Colin had such a strong following in the team, such a sort of everyone just wanted him to do well, that didn't happen. You know, the great thing about sport, it throws up some extraordinary sets of circumstances. Who would believe that Carlos would fall off a bicycle? Actually, we later found out it was a motorbike, so not quite what we were told in the first instance. But anyway, who would believe that would then set the scene for the second half of the year, with Colin winning in New Zealand, one of his favourite events. Then, of course, doing very well in Australia, and Carlos retiring. And then we're starting to go down to the wire. I can't remember how many times I've had to tell the story of Catalonia and what happened on that final night and then going into the final day. I guess we've all got a different view of what happened there. I'm sure that Jimmy will have his recollections of our discussions. Carlos no doubt has his, and I'm very clear on mine. We sat down the night before. We were trying to win the manufacturer's title for Subaru, remember? And yeah, the driver's title is very important, but for us, the manufacturer's title for Subaru, that was critical. So we needed both cars at the finish, and that would seal the title for us. So with Carlos in a modest lead, I can't remember what, probably 20 seconds or thereabouts, we said, look, let's just call it a day at that. Let's just cruise to the finish, no risk. Obviously, Colin wasn't happy about that idea, but you know, in a professional team, that's what you have to do sometimes. And the next morning, and this is the bit that you have to ask Carlos about this bit. The next morning, I understand Carlos started winding Colin up a little bit about, well, didn't need team orders, could have beaten you anywhere, and that was red rag to a bull. And of course, he crosses the finish line of the last stage, ostensibly in the lead. But that wasn't what was planned. And you know what? In a team, if you don't follow team orders, you have anarchy, and you can never control the team again. So I was very robust about the situation, and I'm sure that I wasn't Colin's favourite person for a few hours, but or maybe a little bit longer for that matter. But we insisted that Colin took a time penalty at the last control and handed the victory to Carlos, which put them on equal points as they went into the final round back in RAC Rally in UK. You know, if you go into a final round of a championship on your home territory, let alone Colin McRae on the RAC Rally on equal points, you put your money on Colin. And of course, Carlos sensed that. Carlos sensed that not just the team, but the public, everybody was behind Colin. There were flags flying everywhere. It was really everyone willing Colin on. That must have been a very difficult psychological position for Carlos. So for me, it wasn't a foregone conclusion, because it was a long event those days and a lot could go wrong, and they did go wrong as well on occasion. But no, your money always had to be on Colin. When I think back to that scene in Chester Racecourse as Colin was led onto the finish ramp by a piper and the crowds all around us, and one person stands out for me, and that was the person who started this all off. Somebody who we should never forget, Mr. Kuze. He was an unassuming gentleman from Japan, Subaru's representative. He was heading up their competition side of the business, and he was the one who set about this 5 years earlier and said, we are going to set an agenda to try and win the world title. And I always remember his smiling face at the end of that event, and just the sense of achievement from a small company like Subaru. 5 years ago, nobody would ever have believed we would win a world championship, let alone with the youngest driver ever to do it. Of course, when we left Chester Racecourse, that's when it all kicked off. It was one party after another. It wasn't just a party at the finish in Chester. We got invited up to Lanark, where Colin got the keys to the city, freeman of the city or whatever. And then we had an end of term party, an end of season party for the whole team. We got them all together, and I don't know how many of us there would have been in those days in the company, 300 or 400 people probably, I guess, something like that. And the thing that stands out in my mind, the thing that I remember most about that, was Colin's face when we pulled back a curtain and we gave him the car he won the championship with. Of course, when you set the scene for Colin's 95 World Championship title, you have to just understand the profile and the awareness of rallying in those days. This was sort of, this was something that it's hard to imagine, hard to explain to anyone today. We've seen Lewis Hamilton win world titles in Formula One, but this was more than that. There were millions of people who would go out and watch the event. It would be on front pages of newspapers. It was something quite extraordinary.